Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis. I'm a marriage and family therapist and licensed professional counselor trained in trauma and addiction. The Asking Why podcast is for anyone on a journey of healing and restoration. If you are searching for answers to life's questions and want to learn more about root causes from a psychological and theological mix, this show is for you. In this podcast, myself and a co-host from Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness will interview guests on a wide range of topics in order to get down to the heart of the problems facing our world and understand why things happen and how to change the world and ourselves for the better. Want to learn more tips and tricks to living a healthy lifestyle? Visit us at Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to meet our staff or book a speaker, go to clintdaviscounseling.com. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe today. Putman Restoration is a proud sponsor of the Asking Why podcast. Putman Restoration specializes in commercial disaster services, including water damage, fire, smoke, mold, and storm. Their goal and desire is to get your properties up and running as soon as possible after disaster strikes. Hospitals, schools, hotels, and large municipal buildings. Malls, churches, and large commercial properties are their specialty. Managed properties nationwide? No problem. Putman Restoration services their clients nationwide. They are strategically partnered with elite restoration companies throughout the U.S. and Canada, giving their clients resources during disasters where normal companies would be tapped out. Trust the professionals at Putman Restoration when disaster strikes. Visit them online at www.putmanrestoration.com or give them a call at 318-453-5029. All right, welcome to the Asking Why podcast. This is episode 68. And we have Hope Pedraza on today. We're friends from Tech back in the day, Louisiana Tech in Louisiana. And so, just saw some awesome things she was doing online with health and body and all the things that she's doing with vegetable diet and eating healthy and eating clean and endocrine systems. And, all your posts have been so awesome. And so I just thought it'd be awesome to have you on here and talk through some of the things you're doing and maybe inform our clients about different ways of looking at their body and mental health and how those things can help, and then maybe some tips on how we can all live a better lifestyle. So
love it.
Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. So introduce yourself. Who are you? Kind of what's your credentials? What do you do? And then we'll get into your story.
Yeah. So I am a certified holistic nutritionist, and I'm a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, which is a mouthful just to say that I'm a functional nutritionist and I use functional labs and screenings to help get to the root cause of issues going on in the body. In addition to that, I am a certified Pilates instructor, and I'm the founder of In Balance, which is a Pilates-based fitness studio. We have a couple locations here in San Antonio. So that's like, I got my brick and mortar thing going and I got my online thing going. So I kind of get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I understand that for sure. Okay, I didn't know that. That's awesome. Yeah, we kind of dip in that same world of doing the podcast and trying to get things out and educational things, and then also just having the counseling practices.
Yeah.
And I feel like in the world we live in, you have to kind of do both.
Yeah, for sure.
There's so many more people you can reach online and through resources, but at the same time, then people actually want to come in and get physical help, and that's great.
Yep.
So tell me about... just kind of tell me your story, where you're from and kind of what led you into kind of this world of what I would say is a very unique way of working in the American Western medical model.
That's true. That's very true. It's very true. So it started the brick and mortar thing was kind of my first deal, right? Like I grew up dancing, which got me into Pilates, and I started teaching Pilates when I was at Tech with you.
Okay.
And that kind of put me into the world of like teaching Pilates and fitness. And, back in college, I worked with the football team and I worked with the basketball team and the girls volleyball team. So just working with athletes and different bodies and just fascinated me about the human body. And then, as I got out of college and kept going, I was presented with the opportunity it was a failing yoga studio that was going to close, and I decided I would buy it. And I don't know. I didn't know what the heck I was doing, but I thought I'd figure it out because it sounded like fun.
Yeah.
And so I opened, I bought it, and then I rebranded and changed it and made it to what it is today, which is In Balance. And so we do it's all Pilates-based fitness classes. We have signature classes, and we do bar and yoga and trampoline cardio and HIIT classes and all kinds of things. But when I had my brick and mortar is kind of when I got even more interested in nutrition. I've always been interested in nutrition, but seeing all the women kind of coming in and out of the doors and my doors, and hearing them talk to, each other about, they're doing this diet and that diet and all this. And I'm like, okay, this is not how you do things. Like,
It's not working. Yeah.
No, it's not. And so I wanted to be able to provide like this one, because I already wanted to be this one-stop shop, right? Because we had so many different like modalities in one spot, but I wanted to be this really comprehensive place where they could also connect the nutrition with the wellness, with the movement, with the fitness. And so I started out just doing like just this basic nutrition coaching certification, just to give them like, some sort of guidance, support kind of thing. And as I started working with them, I had clients seeing results and stuff, but I realized that like as a nutrition coach, I was taking such a superficial approach to what was going on in their body. Like, yeah, I mean, at some level, calories are important, but it's not all that matters.
Mm-hmm.
And, these women were dealing with like crazy hormone things that they've been dealing with forever. And, thyroid things and gut things and, unresolved, unmanaged trauma they've never dealt with that's causing all kinds of things going on in their body, So
Amen.
yeah. And so I'm realizing like, okay, like there's more to this equation than like, let's eat healthy and watch your calorie count,
Yeah.
And so that just kind of sent me down the path of further my education. I did a 2-year program to get my diploma in holistic nutrition, and then did the course to be an FDNP, to just really be able to reach people at a deeper level. Because, and this coming from the mental health space, like there's wellness really is such a complex thing. Like it's not just about what you eat and how you move your body. Otherwise, like a lot less of us would be sick. But the fact is, you can do all the things. You can work out and watch your diet, and you can still have things going wrong in your body. And so the functional approach really is, I think, I mean, it's the only way to really find like true healing, because you're meeting it at, the mental level, emotional level, the physical level, at the cellular level,
Yeah, that's great. One of the things I've noticed on a lot of your Instagram pages and Facebook posts is that root, getting to the root. And I think that's, you said like in the mental health field, we understand that. But unfortunately, even in the mental health field, there's been a lot of symptom treatment. There's a lot of like, what's your anxiety? What's your depression? Let's do some behaviors and some coping skills to get rid of that. And what we've really tried to do here is get to those root causes as well. And so I love that you kind of take that approach. And anybody we kind of refer to and partner with, we love taking that approach, as well. Just going, okay, let's get past the symptom treatment stuff and get down to the root cause.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Exactly.
So that's kind of how your business model started. But what got you into, what's your story as far as like personally, what motivated you, what kind of led you to doing this work?
I think it's
as much as you want to share, as little as you want to share.
I know. Well, and that's what I was going to say. It's a little multifaceted, because I start to tell my story and I'm like, well, actually, there's this other pieces that So I did have a lot of health like things growing up. Like I wasn't like a super sickly kid, but I had a lot of issues growing up. I had really bad digestive issues. I went to a bazillion different doctors and colonoscopies and endoscopes and all these things, trying to figure out what it was. And just uncomfortable and just feeling sick, like basically all the time. I had terrible allergies. I got allergy shots for like 15 years of my life. And I just didn't feel good a whole lot when I was a kid. And so, dealing with that and, basically at the end of the day, after, I saw how many doctors I saw, the doctor's like, oh, you have IBS, which is basically doctor speak for like, we don't know what's wrong with you. Your stomach hurts. Yeah. And so, as I got older, I started to kind of educate myself and, read and learn and try to figure out like, okay, what can I do? That kind of thing. And so, sometime out of college, I was reading some books, and I decided reading some books on a vegan diet. I'm like, okay, maybe this is the thing that'll help. And so I decided, read a couple books, and I decided, okay, tomorrow I'm going to be vegan. Let's see what happens. And so for me, it worked. For me, it was like my digestive system calmed down, my skin, like all these things started to shift. And so then I'm like, okay, I can recognize that like that shift in my diet is what's helping my body. And so that also kind of sparked the fire where it's like, okay, how many more people can I help to use food as medicine, right? The whole like food is medicine thing to help heal their bodies. And so I think part of it was that. And I think the other part of it, while I grew up with, which of course these two are related, like of course looking back, I'm like, of course they're related. Of course I had digestive issues growing up. I was also growing up, was very type A perfectionist, and I grew up in the dance world and in the ballet world. It's all about perfection, right? It's all precision, perfection. Like that's what it is.
That's the culture.
And and so that, I had, because of that, and I'm sure there was other factors involved. And we lived in the 90s, we lived in diet culture, so 80s and 90s diet culture. I had a really terrible relationship with food, and so it was torturous for years. I mean, even into my 20s, I think was when things finally started to click. And I think really it was kind of, I had this moment where I kind of started healing my body with a plant-based diet. It was sometime after that where I realized, like, okay, like now I need to heal the rest of my body. Like I need to heal the other things going on in my body,
Yeah.
And so it was a process, it was a process. And I think that's the other part of it too, is, understanding how long I went on, like, essentially torturing my body by starving it or whatever else I was doing to it, and recognizing the effects of that, and not wanting, other women to have to do that to themselves, or wait till it's too late, and to where they have really severe things going on in their body that it's that much harder to reverse or to heal. So I think it was a combination of like this relationship with food that I had, and then this, this health digestive issues I had growing up. Like it just, both of these just kind of like steered me on the path that I'm on now, just to help women, live the healthy life they want. But not only that, but just because I do work mostly with women, but just be able to like feel good in their bodies. Like that's all anybody wants.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's such a underserved population, as a husband of a wife who's raised kids and had miscarriages and birthed children and done the natural birth thing. And, she's a dietitian and working in that world, you ladies are under such scrutiny. I mean, we're all under scrutiny when it comes to physical appearance, but women, I think, and, get so much more pressure from the general culture, women and men.
Totally.
And we get it from both, but there's just a different dynamic when it comes to it. And so there's not enough voices like yours out there trying to counter the culture. Ashley's going to love this podcast because we talk about all this stuff all the time. But yeah, women being comfortable, and men being comfortable in their bodies, regardless of size or diet or look or shape, or it's what do you need to do to feel comfortable?
Yeah.
And so, but I would say there's so many myths and issues that our culture's like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Like we have kids with food allergies, and we make certain, we make certain compromises, and people are like, well, why do you do that? It's not that big of a deal. It's like, oh, if you only knew.
Well, yeah.
And so many people don't know. And so
Totally.
I love you putting out what you put out, because I think most people, not everybody, because people know and still do. I mean, cigarettes, for example. I mean, people know they're bad. They smoke them anyway. But so many things when it comes to food and diet culture, are so toxic, and yet people just think they're normal and okay.
Yeah.
And like almost like what the goal is. Like my goal is this, and it's like, wow, that goal is really toxic. So please don't aim for that. And I've heard you say many things like that.
Yes,
so, yeah.
Yes, for sure. Well, and it's like, we grew up in the generation where the only measure of health was like how skinny you were. Like that was it. And so, recognizing that, like I was saying before, there's so many aspects of wellness. And that's the other piece that I the point I want to get across to women is like, it's so much deeper than that, because your health goes so much deeper than that. And there's lots of skinny people out there that aren't healthy. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
it's not a measure of health, and it's not a measure of wellness. And so understanding like what true health really means, that it's more than calories and more than the number on the scale, and that people do understand those aspects of it. Yeah.
Yep. And that's definitely going to play into mental health. And when I say mental health, I mean, like, what do you believe about yourself? What do you believe about God? And what do you believe about other people? Because ultimately, and then, the word psyche is, psychology, it's psyche, which is soul. And it's funny that we divorce the physical from the spiritual from the, all the time. And it's like, but that's literally what the word means. So why are we making it such a physical, it's only your body, or it's only your mental, or, and they're all so separated. So I love that you're doing these things together. What are some things that, you would want the general public who's listening to this, who maybe don't follow you, hopefully they will after this, to know, or what they don't know about what you do and kind of how it works?
Yeah. I think, That's a very tough question to get started on.
I'm sure.
I think that, when you're so the women I work with predominantly are dealing with like chronic things, right? Chronic hormone, gut, thyroid, autoimmune. It's things they've been plagued with for years, and they've been brushed off by doctors. They've been written off by doctors. The medical gaslighting thing is a real thing.
Absolutely.
Just so your listeners know, it's a real thing. And I mean, so many women that I talk to, it's frustrating for me that the doctors know these stories exist, that women are brushed off and they end with stage 4 cancer that they were dismissed from, that doctors know these stories exist, and yet they still brush off patients who have concerns.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's typically when they find me, is it's like, nobody will listen to me and I need some help. And so,
and not all doctors, but
exactly,
many,
yes,
many,
for sure.
Yes.
Not all doctors, and this, it's definitely not to bash doctors. We need doctors. Doctors are important, but
we have to look at the reality.
Yes, right.
And there is a problem.
Definitely there's some holes there that just, yeah. And so yeah, I think the first thing really is, I always like to get the point across to especially women, because it's disproportionately happens to women.
Yeah, of course.
Is that if something feels off in your body, then it is. And if somebody won't listen to you, find somebody who will.
That's so
because
good.
And there's such power in listening to your intuition. And if it tells you something is off, then it is. And so I think that's the first piece, is really just like taking ownership and responsibility, advocating for yourself, and finding somebody who will listen, that will listen and with intent to like try to get to the bottom of it, rather than just kind of push you off to the next person, So I think that's the first part of it. And I think the other part of it is the healing process is really, I don't want to say complicated, because that sounds like it's scary, but it's a complex thing. Like, right, there's diet involved. Like, of course, there's diet changes involved. And there's, we work a lot with sleep and stress and the nervous system. There's so many pieces involved. And I think the like true lasting healing can only happen when you put all those pieces together. And I know, a lot of people come to me, they've worked with other practitioners who, they've done the diet part and the supplements, and they've done 5,000 supplements, but something hasn't stuck. And it's typically, they haven't, the stress in the nervous system work for me. And I know you see this a lot with the mental health stuff, being able to like help people regulate their nervous system.
Yep.
Is such a huge thing, because I mean, let's be honest, like when you're, especially when you're, I deal with a lot of people who deal with anxiety, like debilitating anxiety, like some are on medication, some aren't. But when you're looking at things like anxiety, depression, like it's really just an extent of dysregulation in the body, right? Like, how dysregulated are you?
Yes.
And that's what all dis-ease comes from. It's dysregulation, it's stress in the body, dysregulation in the body. And so being able to put the pieces, of course, with the diet and the supplementation and, the exercise and all those pieces, but putting that together with the stress management piece and the nervous system regulation piece. And for me, a huge part of it is a mindfulness piece. Because like you were talking about the soul, like you can't separate the two, the mind, body, the soul, it's all one. So you have to work all three of those together to be able to put like the whole healing equation together.
Yeah, it's beautifully said. Yeah, for me, it's why this podcast is called Asking Why. It's the why, it's why is your nervous system dysregulated?
Mm-hmm.
So it's so crazy. Most of the system, it gets way up here in the, let's just see that it is and let's physically treat it. And then we get down to, okay, well, now we know what it is, so let's treat that. And it's like, okay, but deeper is, why is that happening in the first place? Why is your nervous system, why are you in fight or flight?
Exactly.
Again, it's going to be your belief systems. What do you believe about yourself? What do you believe about a higher power? What do you believe about other people? And those traumas are going to come from a lesson you learned from your parents, or a lesson your mom taught you about your weight or your body. I mean, in therapy, I see so many stories, especially around food and women and exercise, that is a moment of, my mom said this about my body. My dad said this about how I was dressed. Mm-hmm. My mom ate food this way.
Yep.
And that's the root causes.
Like,
what is that narrative? Sure. And it's like, most things never remotely even get close to touching it, because, man, you can make so much money and so much support. And I'm not saying those are all bad things to treat the symptoms. You should. I mean, those symptoms need to be treated, but we can get lost in the symptom treatment because we're all full and busy, and we have a caseload that's slammed just doing that. Mm-hmm. And then we lose like the time to get deeper and go, okay, I don't want you to just keep having to work the system. I want you to change and grow and not be dependent on the diet or the medication or whatever the thing is.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
100%.
So what are some ways, we've talked about a little bit, mental health and physical health overlap, but how are you seeing clients with what you're doing? How is their mental health improving? What are you seeing in kind of that area?
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said before, I do have quite a few clients right now, especially right now, that deal with anxiety. And I feel like it's such a common thing. And like some of them, it's like, oh, I get anxiety every now and then. But some of it's like I've had some who have like been in the hospital, like they thought they were having a heart attack and they're having an anxiety attack. So, I mean, I have some that it's just debilitating.
Very common.
And yeah, totally. And yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I have this one client and I've been working with her for a while. And the first steps we take is kind of like, okay, let's calm the stress response down in the body. Like we make some diet changes, get rid of inflammatory things and, kind of start from there. And she messaged me, I mean, it couldn't have been a week later. And she was like, I know we're just getting rid of like gluten and dairy and, sugar and stuff. She's like, but I already feel like my anxiety is better. She's like, is that weird? I'm like, no, it's not weird.
Caffeine.
So yeah, exactly. Like, oh, we've calmed your adrenals down and your body's not freaking out. Like, of course your anxiety is better. So yeah, I mean, I think
that's wild though, Hope. I mean, like those things are so simple.
Yeah.
But like caffeine, for example, is such a killer.
Totally. Yes.
I mean,
yes.
I tell people all the time, I stopped drinking caffeine except for in the morning. I don't drink caffeine past 9. Yeah. Every once in a while I will if I forget. But it changed my life. And people are like, what? I drink like 5 cups a day, or I drink 2 Cokes, or I drink 3 Cokes and I have lunch and I have dinner. Man, my anxiety and my tension and my pain and all those kind of things like immediately went away.
Yes.
And yes, it was a pain in the butt the first week.
Sure.
But like just that one thing, if you can get people, it's like, yes, you're anxious. You're drinking 1,000 milligrams of caffeine a day or whatever.
Your body's like totally wired. Well, and I think really people do underestimate what it does to your body. Yep. Yes. Like, well, and especially for me, a lot of the women I work with, I do a lot of labs and stuff. So I'm able to actually see what's going on in their body. And it's like their adrenals are totally tanked. Like your adrenals are like struggling for dear life. And then you're just pouring caffeine on and then they don't know what to do.
So talk about that for a second for the average person. Like what is the adrenal gland and like what is a really quick like way for them to go, oh, I need to check into that.
Yeah. So your adrenals, these little glands above your kidneys, around your kidneys, and they produce your stress hormones like cortisol. Most people have at least heard of cortisol. Cortisol is your stress hormone. And so stress hormone is important because it helps get us through stressful situations. It kind of helps with pain and that kind of thing. But it's when it's being emitted all the time that it becomes a problem. Because then your body is constantly in that stressed out state. It also spikes your insulin. So then you elevated blood sugar, and there's a whole cycle of things that happens from there. So your adrenals can get super tired. People might have heard of adrenal fatigue before. It's a common term, but your adrenals start to get worn out when they're pumping out so much cortisol for so long. And at some point, there's too much cortisol is too bad, but also too little cortisol is bad. And so I would say the majority of the women that I work with, they come to me thinking like, oh, my cortisol's got to be through the roof. I'm so, stressed. But it's actually the opposite. Like they're totally tanked. Yeah. And their cortisol is like barely there. So, and it's dangerous when you get that low. I mean, I've had people who've ended up in the hospital because, their body was just barely functioning because they had just no more to give. So yeah, that's what your adrenals are. And caffeine, just like, it's a stimulant, right? It's a stimulant. And so it can just overwork your adrenals. And that is one of the things at the beginning, caffeine. And it is a big thing for some people. Like there's some people have to have this whole like weaning process.
They just turned the podcast off right now. They're like, yeah, no, right. They're saying no to caffeine.
Never mind.
Do you have children? Like, how are you supposed to function?
I know. And I try to use myself as an example, and it doesn't help. Like it doesn't help at all. Like I don't drink caffeine. I'm like, it doesn't help.
No.
But that's like some people have to have like this weaning process. So if you're listening and you want to help yourself wean off caffeine, you can make the switch to green tea. It's not as harsh on your body. It's not as much caffeine. And then from there, have them kind of go every other day and then maybe every 2 days. But yeah, caffeine's a big one. And especially if you're prone to anxiety, it can be anxiety inducing.
Absolutely.
So it's just kind of, it just exacerbates the problem. But there's other things involved too, of course. But making those diet changes and allowing, like, again, that stress response in your body to calm down. And and super inflammatory foods can do the same thing, like gluten, especially if you're somebody who's sensitive to gluten. Not saying everybody is, because everybody is not.
Yep.
But for people who are sensitive to gluten, the gluten can be a trigger for anxiety, like 100%. And I have clients who do that. They, they slip up, they eat gluten, they message me 2 days later, like, oh my gosh, my anxiety was through the roof. And that's just what happens. So yeah, I now forget what the original question was we were answering, but I think people just don't understand, like,
no, that's great.
The layers, that are involved in like addressing the mental health piece of it, right? Because it really and truly all goes back to mental health. I mean, it really does.
Yeah, if you look at it through the lens in which we're talking about, which is great. No, you're killing it. You're doing a great job, Hope. This is exactly what I wanted. I mean, we're having a conversation that isn't going to answer everybody's questions. My goal for you was to tweak people's interests and then go, oh, I need to look into this, right? Because this is something that I'm not thinking about. And we're talking about physical things like adrenal glands and sympathetic nervous system and all those kind of things. But that is the science part of the soul. That is the connection that I try really hard to get people to think about, is like all this stuff works together.
Yeah.
And you can't really treat one without the other. You're treating both. And you can break it down and say, well, this is your adrenal gland, or, same thing with dopamine or with addiction. What we've learned is, right, it's not that you're chasing a high, it's that you're avoiding the withdrawal. When you stay in addiction for so long, your brain's not even creating dopamine anymore. In some cases, you're just going, I got to keep doing this thing because I don't want to feel the crash.
Yes.
And so it's so wild.
It is.
When we get that depleted.
For sure. And I think the other part of that too, talking about dopamine and, is, like you're talking about, like not separating the science from like because the other part too, I think people don't understand how much their emotional piece comes into play and how much like the emotional piece affects their body. And I was having this conversation the other day with somebody, I forget who was, I think it was another interview, and we were talking about like emotions in the body, and you can say it's woo, if you want to, but you can't argue with science. And science proves that energy is chemically stored in the body. Like emotions are chemically stored in the body. And so when you have, talking about trauma, we're kind of going down the rabbit hole here, but when you're talking about like, dealing with mental health, and you mentioned trauma earlier, like all of that is emotions stored in the body, and it's literally chemically stored in there that has to be released before your body can heal. And so the nervous system part, the mindfulness part, all of those pieces, that plays into part 2 of the healing, like healing from the trauma and allowing that the stuck emotions, the stored emotions to like chemically be released from the body. And I don't know if you know who Dr. Joe Dispenza is. He's a neuroscientist, but he talks about this a lot. And like you were talking about not being addicted to the dopamine, but that's what happens with these emotions, is you get into these cycles where now you're addicted to these emotions because they are chemicals in your body. You're addicted to feeling these emotions. So now it's that much harder to heal and get rid of it and heal that stored trauma because you're addicted to those feelings.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I always relate it theologically to Paul talking about be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so for me, it's this idea of how do, you're renewing. So you're bringing it back to truth. You're not coming up with something new. You're going, well, something about me originally was true. And for me, it's like you were made in God's image. You were loved, you were valued, you were created to be this thing. And then everything went awry. So you're not becoming something, you're returning back to the truth of who you've always been.
Yep.
And you're born as a child in this world, innocent and not, you don't come out addicted. You can scientifically, right? I mean, but that's not what you're wired to be. It's the deficit of your parent that is passed down from epigenetics and all these things. And yet you're the victim of just being in a broken world. Yep. You didn't choose it. You didn't want it. Now, at some point you can become responsible for some of those things, but out the gate, so many things are not our choice.
Right.
Not our gender, our ethnicity, all these things. It's not like we woke up and like, I'm going to be this.
Right.
Although, today, who knows, in some ways. But the reality is that the connective piece for people to listen, who's listening to this, is you were made to be a certain way that was good and loved and valued, and that got off somewhere. And so through connecting this mind, spirit, body, you're trying to get back to that original plan.
Yep.
And so much of what you do is helping people get back to that. You gotta treat the symptoms. You gotta look at the body and the physical manifestation of it, but then you gotta dive deeper and go, where did this all start? And where did that go wrong?
Right.
And that's hard work.
It is. And that's the other piece of it too, is it is work, and it is hard. And a lot of times, I mean, I dare to say every time, but I don't like to speak in generalities, but most of the time, it gets worse before it gets better. And that's hard for people to grasp. And I get messages from my clients, and they have a bad day, or they have a flare up or whatever, and they feel like crap. Oh, I feel like crap for the past 3 days. Well, I mean, it happens. Like, I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried that you're, going back to it. It's a process, but it's hard work. Your body's like resisting the change, because your body wants to do what's comfortable, right? Like, that's
right.
how we're made. Our body wants to do what's comfortable. And when we fall into the state that we're in, whether it's like the chronic illness stage or not, now what's comfortable, that's what's comfortable now, is this chronic illness stage. So you're trying to change things, and you're trying to rewire your brain, rewire your body to function a different way. Your body's like, no, like, I'm comfortable working like just like I am right now. So it's hard. Exactly. So yeah. But it is, like you said, I think it's a great point that you're literally just going back to how you were originally designed to be healthy. And I tell people that all the time. Our bodies are made to heal themselves. And we have everything we need in our body to heal itself. But it's, putting it through the ringer with stress and trauma and, the environment, whatever, that, we have things that just get in the way.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that you're being, in your post, you're being so specific about what those things mean. And I think that's a huge thing that we all need to get back to. Is I think the mental health field, the diet field, all these fields, they say these words as if everybody knows what they mean, and we all agree on the terms, and we don't. It's like
it's true.
We don't actually know what that means. So when we say trauma, or we say whatever, it's like, we got to slow it down and make sure that people know, hey, this is exactly what we're saying. So I love that you do that very well. Well, I know you got to go in just a few minutes. Let's see where you're at. I know you got a little bit of time. So what do you think currently in America, in the clients that you see, what are some of the biggest hurdles that you feel like clients are facing in our culture, I guess?
Just in like health in general?
Yeah, just in like the general day to day, like, is it busyness? Is it, false narratives? What are the things that you hear the most from your clients going, oh, well, I can't do that because of this?
Yeah. I think probably first and foremost is talking about false narratives, is believing, because, and again, I don't want this to sound like I'm bashing doctors, but just in my experience, not all doctors do this, but just doctors telling their patients that it's normal. The things that they're dealing with are normal, and they're not. And it's, I've had, so many clients who come to me, and it's like, well, the doctor just said, you just learn to live with it. It's normal, whatever, but it's not.
Yep.
And so I think that's the first thing, is they're under the impression like, well, maybe this is just how I have to live. Like, you don't have to live with pain every day. You don't have to live being uncomfortable every day. Like, you don't. So I think
normal's not healthy, right?
Exactly. Well, and they're getting confused with common and normal. Common is not the same thing as normal. Like, sure, it's common. It's super common, but it doesn't mean it's normal.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to live that way. So I think that's a big piece of it. But then, at the same time, you have to be ready to like dive into that, to kind of dive on the other side of that. Well, if it's not normal, then what really is the problem? So you have to be prepared for that as well. But I think that narrative is probably the big one that a lot of people believe, because they're just like either, and some people may not want to put the effort into it, and that's fine. They can keep going the allopathic way and just keep putting band-aids on things, and that's fine. But just to understand that it's like common and normal are not the same thing. And I think people sometimes, the other big thing that I see is that people kind of start the healing process out of order. And this is like getting a little bit sciencey, but I find that a lot of, I'm going to do it. I think a lot of people, they want to jump straight to like, tell me the supplements, tell me the diet, like tell me those things to fix. Yeah. But it's like, okay, well, like there's an order to things, right? Like I mentioned before, like I start with like, let's calm down the stress response. Let's get rid of these inflammatory foods. Well, then we have to take a look at like your detox pathways, like how is your liver working and your lymphatic system and your kidney and like all of your detox organs. Because if we're like trying to get rid of like, pathogens in the body and you're detox organs aren't functioning properly, like it's all just going to get gunked up. Like it's just like throwing garbage on top of garbage. Like it's not going to go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So like knowing that there is an order of operations in the healing process, and that you have to start, and everybody wants and they want it yesterday, but like there is a process, and you have to go through the steps for the lasting change, to heal.
Yeah, that's it. Well, but they're just set up in that same system of philosophy, because that is the system of care.
Mm-hmm.
And it's our own fault. And, when you say doctors and whatever, it's kind of like blaming pastors for everything, or blaming the congregation, or blaming a politician. And we're all voting for these things by agreeing to it.
Totally.
And then people are
collective.
Taking follow along, taking advantage of that, whatever you want to call it. But the reality is that we're all playing a part in this culture. We're all a vote, one vote away from making something a thing. And so when we go to the doctor because we have a cold, and we say, and they're like, hey, well, look, we can give you a shot, and we can give you a Z-Pack. And people are like, absolutely. And then you take the Z-Pack and you take the shot. There's not a neutral, know. So if you don't have a bacterial infection, you just have a virus, neither one of those things do anything good for you. Exactly. Like that's just science. Like the doctor would say that, but the doctor's like, you're here demanding something, so you feel better.
I'm going to give you something.
So I'm going to give you something, because then my job isn't like worth anything if I'm not giving you anything to you.
Totally.
And so it's this cycle, and it's like, we want something now, but we don't realize what we're compromising for the long term.
Right.
And now we see 40 years later, what all this kind of care has done to our bodies. And when you say gluten, or my kids have really bad food allergies, when they have food allergies and sensory issues and ADHD and more pregnancy issues. And it's like,
absolutely.
Well, man, for 40 years, we've been injecting ourselves with things that we didn't need just because we wanted something.
Yeah. We wanted the quick fix. We wanted it fixed, and we wanted it then. Well, I did a post about this not too long ago, because, and I'm in this generation too, but
100%.
the women grew up in this generation where we were given birth control, like you're breathing, take birth control. And so now look what we're dealing with now. Infertility, like out the wazoo, infertility and PCOS and cervical cancer and ovarian cancer, like all these things have skyrocketed.
Postpartum depression.
Like let's think exactly, anxiety, depression, like extreme estrogen dominance. Like that's a big one that I see in a lot of my clients. Well, it's like, let's trace it back. Like all of us were on birth control for like 20 years. So it's like, it's just, but that's the other thing is, we don't even think about, like you're saying, we don't think about the long-term side effects, and nobody tells us. So it's like, oh, well, this will fix whatever, so and
I get it. I mean, I don't think all those people I'm not have a tinfoil hat on. I don't think there was a group of people that were like, let's make all the women sick and all the men a certain way, but they certainly, it's that same cycle of people wanted answers now. There was a problem going on, and so we got the best possible solution as quick as possible and gave it to them so we could say we did something.
Exactly it.
And I don't want to get into a big COVID thing, but like it's similar to the whole thing. Whatever side of the coin you on, that's what happened. We needed a solution. We needed a fix.
And we needed it fast.
And we needed it now. And some of that worked, but there will be consequences in some ways, and already are, culturally, emotionally, physically, for certain populations of people. And I guess that's the biggest thing I want for people to do is advocate for yourself, look at your own body, your own family history, your own epigenetics, and then do what's best for your body and your kid's body. Try not to take a general, like, oh, well, this is what everybody's doing for anxiety or depression. Or, the normal is a problem.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, and I think that's a great point to bring up. And you're talking about things I see most often is people kind of undervaluing that bioindividuality piece, because it is all bioindividual. Like there's no, which is why you work with somebody rather than just trying to go do it your own and do what everybody else is doing, because everybody's different. And like, and I talk a lot about the gut microbiome, and that's, I like to use that as an example too, because your gut microbiome, like, which is all the bugs and the bacteria and stuff in your gut, it's as unique to you as your fingerprint. Mm-hmm. Like your children that you birthed have a different gut microbiome than you. So like saying that you need the same care, it just doesn't work. Like it just doesn't work that way.
It's the beautiful thing about humanity and the complicated part too, is we are not very unique in the sense of how things play out, but we're very unique in the individual stories and how we're wired. And so that there's that tension. It's nobody's fault. Yeah. But I think that's a huge takeaway. I think what you just said and what we're trying to get to is like, each person listening to this, you have to, I say this all the time when people ask me about LGBTQ issues or anxiety issues or trans issues, or, it's a big popular thing that's going around. I'm like, I don't know unless they're sitting in my office and I'm talking to them. I can't give you a general, this is how this happens, or this is why this happens, or this is why somebody who gets in a car wreck has PTSD and someone else doesn't unless they're sitting in my office. Now, when I hear their story and I listen from birth to 35, a lot of things start to make a lot more sense than they did if I just tried to say, this is how everybody is. And I think we get in a lot of trouble on podcasts and in legislation and everything when we're trying to make huge sweeping generalities about people when we don't even know them.
For sure.
And so I love that you're doing this individualized, looking at people, doing the testing, looking at their bodies, and then you're such better equipped to give them better solutions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's what I want to leave people with too, that people I work with is it's the healing process, of course, is important, but it's also like, I want to empower them with the knowledge, right? So now they can make their own informed decisions about things,
Work yourself out of a job a little bit eventually, because there's more people that need help, right? I mean,
it's true.
You can't have everybody on your caseload for 20 years.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I know you're about up on time. Any closing comments or thoughts or things that you would want people to know?
I mean, I think my biggest piece of advice is always kind of what I mentioned before, but just honing in on it again is always just to tune into that intuitive piece. I think that's a really underutilized part of your health is your intuition. And a lot of us, we shut that part out, like, cause we're listening, like you were just saying before, we're listening to the noise and we're listening to the collective rather than listening to our own intuition. And I really feel like that's the most powerful piece is if being able to listen to your intuition and using that to make the best decisions for yourself and knowing that, the best thing for you is not necessarily the best thing for everything else, but if it feels right in your soul on an intuitive level, then that is what's right for you.
That's good. That's really good. So do you do telehealth stuff with people?
I do.
Okay. You work online.
So that's what my nutrition business is all online. So all of it is, I have clients in Europe and Alaska and
that's
all
awesome.
places.
So tell our listeners where they can find you and what are your like handles and all that stuff.
Yeah. I'm probably most active on Instagram. I'm at the Hope Pedraza. And you can find me on Facebook as well. And I do have a free Facebook group you can join. It's Live Wholesome and Healthy. And it's just all things functional nutrition, holistic living, and
Awesome. And you do podcast visits and all that kind of stuff. So anybody listening that has their own podcast and wants Hope to come on there and talk about this stuff, like, the more the merrier. I might have to have you back and deep dive into some of these specific topics because
I would love to.
I could talk about adrenal glands and all that stuff for 30 minutes. So
we can nerd out. I like to nerd out.
We'll set that up and make it happen.
Sounds
it's so good to see you. I'm
too.
super proud of all that you're doing and what God's doing in your life and your family and just everything, because you're bringing a lot of help and healing to people, and that's really cool to see.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a good day with your clients.
Thanks.
And thanks guys for listening, and God bless and have a good week.